Welcome to this week's edition of In the Clubhouse with EMD Baseball. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my wonderful co-host as usual, Keith Glasser. How we doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. We, as we've talked about in recent episodes, we got this roster crunch that's coming for Division I baseball, down from 40 to 34. And while we often focus on high school recruiting, I think we'd be remiss to not discuss the impacts that this will have on college rosters, and specifically the freshman class that will be stepping foot on campus here in a couple of weeks in the fall of 2024. And I think just kind of got a few tips, few things to think about, and kind of really trying to frame this up in terms of how this impacts those guys. Because, yeah, there's an impact on the 2025 class. We've talked about that. But the reality is that some of these roster cuts are going to come with the guys who are currently on campus. There's, for most schools, you're going to have to some way, shape, or form shed at least 6 roster spots. In a lot of places, it's going to be closer to 8 or 10 because they're going to want to get under the 34 so they can dabble in the old transfer portal. I know I got a few thoughts and some words of wisdom, if you will, that I'd like to pass on, but I'm going to kick it over to you to give some initial thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, I think the couple things, you're stepping into, we've talked about this a bunch, like you're stepping into a super uber competitive environment when you get on campus, right? Like those are things that, we've talked about ad nauseum, but I think now that all of a sudden you're going to, like, there's a hard roster cap at 34, like you need to know that this entire year is essentially a tryout for everybody who's on that roster for next year. Because you have to understand, like, yes, there's going to be guys that are graduating and leaving. So, like, let's ballpark that at 8, right? So now you have 32 dudes that are returning. By the way, they're recruiting the 2025 class right now. So, like, that means, like, they're not only going to bring in 2, they're going to bring in. So, like, this is where roster management becomes a big thing. Like, this entire year is a tryout for moving forward. And it goes both ways, right? It goes the way of it's a tryout so that you do really well and you stay at that school and you're one of those guys that is on that roster your sophomore, junior, and senior year. And, you could be getting scholarship money all 4 years. It could be full, it could be partial, whatever, right? That said, like, you also have to make sure that you're taking care of everything off the field, classroom, weight room, everything, because those are going to be the razor thin margins where it's like, well, we could keep him, but he's also a 2-2 and I have to babysit him off the field and he keeps getting written up. Or we can keep him and he's a 3-4 and we never have to worry about him. He's always in the weight room. Like, all things equal, the guy who's not an issue is going to be the guy that's going to be kept. The other part is it's a tryout from the standpoint of, like, look, man, if it doesn't work out at the school you're at, and it's going to be a reality for a lot of people, unfortunately, with this rule change. But if it doesn't work out for you, how you go about what you do every day is going to be huge for you. Because the coaches know that this isn't something that, it's not necessarily something they want to do, right? Like, they don't want to cut all of these kids from their program at the end of the year. But it's a reality because the NCAA made this rule and they're going to have to do it. But same thing, if you go about your business every day and you're really good, but it might just not work out talent-wise at that school, if you do everything, you're great in the classroom, you're great off the field, you don't get written up, you're in the weight room, it's like, hey, man, like, I will help. Like, I genuinely believe that a lot of coaches are really going to try to help the kids that they are cutting from their programs find other landing spots. But it makes it a lot easier to call your friends and your colleagues in this business when you have kids that were in your program for a year that were really good kids, really good humans, did everything that they would needed to do, and were great teammates to boot. Like, it gets super easy to call some of your colleagues and be like, hey, man, like, this kid's a no-brainer. Like, never going to be an issue, always in the weight room, great kid, great teammate. He's just short for us moving forward. And then that opens up so many more doors for you. And it sounds like a really weird thing to say nowadays, with what is, you're going to be a freshman, but this is just the reality of the landscape and what's going on right now. So I think that's that's probably the two main things like that I would pull out of it right now is like the main thing being like this is a tryout, a full year long tryout, and then we'll see where the chips fall. But you want to be doing everything it is that you can possibly be doing over the course of the next 10 months to put yourself in the best position to stay at that school that it is that recruited you that you want to be at. And if it doesn't work out, do all of those things so that it's an easy phone call for your assistants or your head coach to call their colleagues and be like, hey man, I got a guy for you that I think could really help you out. And that opens up a lot more doors for you there too.
Yeah, nailed it. Like absolutely nailed it. Because when push comes to shove, coaches are going to err on the side of the kid that does the stuff the right way. And if you're a pain in the ass off the field, you don't show up to practice on time, or you're not good in the weight room, you don't practice hard, you're not a good teammate, you're getting in trouble, you're drinking, like whatever it is, like that kid, you're giving that coach a reason to not keep you a part of their program. And I think you hit on another point that's incredibly important is that when push comes to shove, you want to make sure that that coach has a reason to make a phone call for you that's a good phone call. Because these coaches, and I truly believe it too, that these coaches aren't trying to end people's careers. It's a circumstance, it's a rule change that they have to abide by. And the side effect of this is that there's kids, whether it's 2025 high school kids or returning players that are going to get told like, hey, you don't have a home. Well, if that coach has seen you for a year because you got after it and you competed and you did everything the right way, that coach will go to bat for you when push comes to shove. And the players out there who think things should be handed to them and you want to be a high maintenance player and you're pouty because things don't go your way, like coaches aren't going to go to bat for you. It's just that simple. Because similar to what we do, like your reputation matters. And like you're not going to put your name on a line for a kid that you know has been a pain in the ass for the last 9 months and pass him off to your buddy so he can be a pain in the ass there.
No, you're not, because it's like anything else. It's the same thing that we do, right? Like we can't call people that we know, and we have relationships with all these coaches on a kid that we know is going to be a pain in the ass. And we can, but we're going to be honest about it, right? You got to be upfront. Like, hey, I want to go to this school. Like, hey man, like I know the guy, but like this act isn't going to fly there. Didn't fly here, not going to fly there. Yep. So it makes it's like anything else. It's like a job reference when you get older. Like, who do you want to be able to call for you to be like, hey, could you write me a recommendation letter or whatever it is to get into grad school, to go to college, to go to get a job, whatever it is, get those phone calls. We all did it as coaches, but like you want somebody that can do that for you, but like you're not going to put your name on somebody who's going to be a pain in the ass for everyone else.
100%. And then, I mean, the other part is like, if you want to kind of bite this off into small chunks, you need to make the 40 this fall. Like you're a freshman going on campus right now. Like you need to make the 40 this fall, period. Mm-hmm. And then you need to find a way to be a productive player during the season because you're not trying to make the roster for next year. You need to get in that like top 30. So what are you doing on a daily basis? Like if you're a freshman, it's not about getting 185 ABs and starting 40 games. Like, can you be a reliable defensive replacement? Can you be a quality backup catcher? Can you be a dude who can play every 3 days but is super productive? Are you a bullpen guy who can just find a role? Like, can you be the up big, down big guy and be successful in it? Like, you need to find a way to prove to that coaching staff from a physical perspective that you belong there. And then in addition to that, you need to check all the character boxes. You need to be a good teammate. You need to do all the right stuff in terms of showing up on time, being committed to the weight room, working hard, practicing hard, like taking your pregame stuff and game day super serious. Like these are things that players don't necessarily recognize. And it all adds up in the long run. Like we've all seen the guys they're the fourth or the fifth outfielder. The kid who's really good pregame for 55 games in the spring, that kid usually ends up being a pretty good player because he's taking advantage of the reps. He's taking really good BPs, getting really good outs in the outfield, and he's not pissing away those opportunities to get better. If you're the kid who wants to take a day off because you know you're not in the starting lineup, eventually that's going to add up. And you're either one, not going to be able to cut the mustard from a talent and a production perspective, but that's the kind of stuff that coaches see that they might not necessarily talk about, that at the end of the year, when you have to make decisions on who you're telling aren't on the roster anymore, you're going to take the kid that you know shows up every day. Because bare minimum, that kid's giving you something.
Right.
Like don't be an energy vampire. Like that is that the saying? Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, I think Brianna says something about that. Farish used to say, be a fountain, not a drain.
Yes, I love it. Be a fountain, not a drain. Like, even if you're the 14th guy on the staff, like be the dude who shows up and takes everything super serious before games and goes about his business, and you prep the right way. Because if you get called on and you're successful, that's a feather in your cap. And your preparation and how you go about your business is going to be even more and more impactful. Like you don't have as much time to settle in as a freshman anymore. You kind of have to be there. Like you have to be ready to go as a freshman due to these roster cuts. And I don't think that this changes. It'll be magnified because of the roster cuts that are upcoming. But in the long run, coaches are always going to need to get below 34 so that they can take advantage of the portal, or maybe they bring in an extra high school kid or two. And you don't have time to settle in as a freshman anymore and like kind of go through the motions as a freshman. And everybody says, well, he's a freshman, he'll figure it out. Like you kind of need to have it figured out. So how you step on campus and how you get acclimated becomes really important. And for those guys who are stepping on campus this fall, whether you have a guaranteed roster spot or you're fighting for a roster spot, every day, every round of BP, every bullpen, every time you show up to the field, every weight room session, like that's a chance to prove that you belong. And if you take that stuff for granted and you're not one of those surefire dudes, like you don't want to find yourself on the outside looking in because of something that was really controllable. Like if you're just not good enough, okay, you can put your head on the pillow at night and be like, you wake up next June and a coach says, hey man, you know what? You're not good enough at this level, but I think you're an awesome kid and I'm going to help you go find another place. That's one thing. But if you end up on the other side of it because of things that you can control, that's on you. And it's going to take some accountability. Like kids need to take ownership of how they go about their business, how they act, how they treat their peers, how you treat your coaches. I just think it's going to get magnified because there's less room for BS anymore, period.
Yeah. I mean, we're saying the same thing and talking about a multitude of different things that can go on over the course of the next 10 months when you're a freshman on campus. And it is going to be magnified because I do think like, and again, like this isn't something that like coaches are not relishing in what it is that they're going to have to do over the next 10 months. But it's going to be a heightened sense of urgency with the fact that, you're always evaluating and trying to figure out what's going to fit in future years. But now like you're evaluating with a lot more scrutiny because you have to cut down. If you're a 40-man roster right now, like you got to cut that down to 34 for next year. And that's not including the guys that are graduating this year. Like you might be down to 30 with graduation right now. and have 7 or 8, 9 commits for next year. Like, the reality is there's going to be people that are going to be cut from programs, and there's going to be people that are going to be told that they don't have a roster spot before they get to campus. And it's already happening. But like the problem is, and like this is a distinct difference, I think. Like, we've talked about this in the past about how like it's nothing new. There's people who have, there's people who have been told they don't have roster spots before they get there. But this one is a lot more, it's a little bit harder because the coaches don't necessarily, they don't want to make these phone calls because of, but it's, their hands are forced because of the NCAA and kind of what's going on in the last couple of years. So, but it's going to be heightened sense of urgency and a lot more scrutiny on what you're doing on and off the field to make sure that you're doing what it is that you need to do to hit your progressions to be able to make sure that you're a guy that's going to be on that roster next year. And every year subsequent, right? Like, this is something that's going to be, it's an every year thing now.
Yep, 100%. You got to fight for it. You got to earn it. You got to compete. The guys who are willing to do that, they'll be just fine. But the guys who think that this is going to get handed to them, you might be having some difficult conversations come next May or June. Do everything you can to make sure that conversation, your exit meeting going into the summer, is a positive one. And those guys are praising you for what you did right, and that they look forward to having you a part of the program moving forward. Some of that's out of your control, but make sure that the things you do control, make sure you're checking those boxes. Anything else?
Nope. Nailed it.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, everybody. We will talk to you next week. Talk to you then. Thank you. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.